our ancestors about 10,000 BC before, they started the journey as a human, probably uncivilized human, because they were hunters and gatherers. But the time from right 10,000 BC, they began or embarked into the new journey that is somehow made them today's world, that is civilized humans. So what are the things, what are the activities that made the human civilized compared to their earlier ancestors? So I think that is the reason or secret behind that divide between civilized and uncivilized, is that cultural aspects or humanization of the nature. In this today's topic, we are going to have a very important discussion what agricultural development have been done since that time immemorial, and in present era we are advanced in that level that we can somehow able to adopt and alter the agricultural plans according to our needs and desires. In this session, and that is very much in the news, the GM mustard or genetically modified mustard crops in India that recently got approved for the environmental release. And this is what we seen here background, that a beautiful mustard farm. And we all Indians know basically the mustard, the part of our culture used in not only for the vegetables but for various cultural or religious purposes. And this mustard variety or mustard species is also known or not unknown in the other part of the world, even in the Central Asia or Europe. So GM mustard very much highlighted point, that is because that genetically engineering or genetic engineering appraisal committee recommended the approval of that DMH11, that is Dhara mustard hybrid variety, for the environmental release. This particular topic very much used for the GS paper 3 and geography optional and prelims as well. So before going into or getting delve to the mustard varieties, every nitty and gritty, but here we need to understand the GEAC. This is one of the nodal agency to provide or approve the trials of hazardous microorganism or recombinants, particularly for the research or industrial use. And this particular body came into existence as per the Environmental Protection Act 1986 and work under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So this body is very and there are some important approvals or approved products we can see in the medicals, that application, that is something insulin we generally use for the diabetic patients to cure, as well as one of the variety which is in India approved, Bolgard 1 and Bolgard 2, one of the BT cotton varieties or cotton's genetically modified version, and these are given appraisal by this nodal agency, Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. So it's very important body we need to have keep in mind and remember. So what is the thing before our hand, and we need to understand, is that Dhara mustard hybrid 11. This is the species, scientific name Brassica juneaceae. That may be a question maybe in some state commissions. So we need to understand. And very professor, that is who is contributed for this development of this DMH11 variety, Deepak Pental. He belonged to University of Delhi and had been a vice chancellor of Delhi as well, and he put his whole effort to develop this variety. And aim behind this development of this mustard variety is that reducing the India's demand or import for the edible oil, which we Indians generally very much consuming. So our very much dependent in the outside for the mustard oil. So that is one of the idea behind the development of this mustard variety. since the creation or the development of this particular variety is through the transgenic or GM technology. So we'll understand every detail of these terms, transgenic, what it refers to and means to. What is important here, the primarily involving the three gene system, that is Bar, Barnese and Barastar gene system. These three combination of these three genetic techniques actually helpful in the developing of this mustard variety. And this is very much important because these genes confers, like Varnese genes confers for the male sterility, while Barastar gene for the restoration of DMH11's ability to produce fertile seed, so that productivity and harvesting may enhanced. And insertion of the third gene, that is a bar, that enables the DMH11 to produce this particular enzyme named as a phosphinothresin N-acetyl transferase. So very important, this particular enzyme responsible for the glufosinate resistance. This glufosinate, we all know that this is the ammonium salt used as the herbicide. So whenever their weeds tends to grow inside particular farming like mustard, so these glufosinate resistance or glufosinate, this particular herbicide is used so that farmers get rid of the problems of weeds, so that the better growth can be ensured for the particular crop. So that is what important for this entire mustard variety, is that resistance to this glufosinate herbicide or weedicide, and this is important. Okay, we'll understand how it works. DMH11 developer in 2016 given a report that is very much important, so that I will quote that according to their safety report, what they presented to the genetic engineering approval committee, they mentioned that although GM mustard hybrid DMH11 contains the bar gene conferring resistance to the herbicide Vasta, or that is phosphinothresin Vasta herbicide, also known as, is required to be used only by seed producers for hybrid seed production, and farmers are not required to spray Vasta in the hybrid GE DMH11 for weed control. So that is a win-win situation, because farmers will not need to additionally spray these hybrid weed control mechanisms, because that will somehow helpful in the cutting of the cost of input for the farming of any particular variety, let's say that mustard, so the GM mustard. So this is what that producer in the stage of production will know, somehow they will manage to coat that particular seeds of GM mustard, so that is already able to encounter, or that is already able to regulate or control the weeds. That is in the sense that will ensure the weeds will not grow in the farm of the mustard. Now, what is present scale of growing GM crops? We can see that some of the developed and developing countries are the pioneers in this application of the GMO crops. About 22 crops are there across the globe, and in present situation about 41 countries are involved or indulged in the farming the GM crops. United States, particularly in Northern America, Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, these countries, and part of China and Pakistan, India, Australia, Portugal, and South Africa. These are the countries, basically those are practicing the GM crops cultivation. And at the same time, but what is important for here, there are about 22 crops, but in India as of now only one crop is only approved and permitted, that is BT cotton variety of the GM variety, genetically modified variety of the cotton. So not other plants or potentially GM mustard is there now, but only BT cotton is allowed in India. So that is always need to be understood or remember. And what is important fact, that about 10% of the world's crop cultivation, that is of that share of genetically modified crops or GM crops. So this is important, about 10% of, but what are the things, or what are the debates that revolves around this GM cropping? So this is very much important, and not only for the India, but for the entire world, that is important. These trio or three things, those are actually three pillar of the GM crops debate. First is that potentiality, how uh, many of the experts of that opinion that GM crops or GM based cropping can help ensure the food security to the globe. So one of the issue that food insecurity is rising day by day as the climate change issues are there, erratic nature of monsoon in India, and various unproductive or various issues, climate vagaries are occurring, so that somehow hampering the productivity and harvesting of the productivity of the soil, as well as harvesting of the crops. So that crop failure is one of the issue. So this GM cropping can help in the food security to be achieved, so that this is known as, we can say, the vehicle for the food security to the globe or world. And second second pillar of this debate is that suitability, that how it will be suitable or accommodative to the farmers as well as policy makers and public in general. That is, that nightmarish health and environmental concerns are involved there. So that is one of the pillar or debate point of that debate, and that is raising so many questions regarding health and environmental aspects. The third thing, that accessibility, because it is hybrid or genetically modified crops or seeds are required expertise and developmental in the developmental stage as well as in the production stage. So for that matter, huge cost and technology is involved. So this is one of the debate point, as and that somehow this that adoption of GM cropping is under the various questions, and that is still persisting. Now if we see that how this genetically modification, so if we, as I stated in the beginning, that we started as a civilized human, started our journey right from 10,000 BC, but this process of developing or achieving the command over the agriculture practices started right from 10,000 BC. But at that time, we just our ancestor just they got to know that how to cultivate, how to domesticate the seeds or plants for our use and for our purity of the food. But later on, that real journey started at the late 1800 century, when first time cross breeding or that grafting type of technologies evolved or they developed and practiced by some section of the society, particularly scientists and farmers in the Europe. That not much achieved in about next 100 to 100 years, but we can see the major development that took place in the 1980s, where very first time in the year 1882, or we can say the 1980s in precisely, that very first time in the California GM tomato developed, genetically modified tomato, and that developed as a GM variety. Very first time that crop developed, that so that we need to remember that tomato was the first variety which was developed through the genetically modified technology or GM, genetically engineering that techniques. In 1990s, that journey started, that remained continued, which started in the 1980s, and later on various varieties of crops started. But in the 1996, some variety of cotton that and corn that developed in the USA. But in India part, we can say that our country in the year 2002, when that BT cotton was developed and adopted by our government, and that allowed to no, for the agriculture purpose or say commercial purpose. So that was a journey, and the recent we can if we try to know that recent genetically modified crop was the apple that began as a commercial production in the USA in the year 2017. So these are the historical genetic modification crops and their journey or their different stages of growth. Now we need to understand science behind GM, how genetically modified crops works and how that developed. So first of all, we need to understand that what is GM food. GM food, simply the editing of gene of crops in such a way that it incorporates beneficial traits from another crop or organism. So this is very interesting that the editing of genes, we know that gene is a basic unit of hereditary or inheritance. Whatever the characters parents or predecessors have, that kind of characters or traits will be acquired by the next generation. This is what the gene's main objective is, what the function of gene is, so that we are like that quote generally use, that like father like son, or like son like father. So whatever the quote is, but that actually giving the sense that the way the father, the son will be there. So that is the idea of, or the function of the gene, if in the simple terms. And but if we edit the gene, that means if we change the traits in the gene structure, particularly we know as a DNA, if we insert that particular character of any that can be taken from the plant or animal or any other organism, and that is desired in, suppose in particular set of any species of any plant or any animal, we can use that particular trait of other organism to the help of the genetic engineering. So that is the genetical engineering or genetic engineering or GM, genetically modification practice. And this is, if through this practice, if we get the any food variety, so we call it as a GM food. So that is very simple. And aftermath, what are the desired result? The image here, how that bacteria is used, and that particular bacteria is used here, and any section of that bacteria as a vector that can be inserted. You know, recently I would like to mention here that Casper9 or Cas9, it is one of the Caesar use. So this is not a Caesar, please don't get it as a simple Caesar used in the that in the saloon, but this is a type of enzyme or protein that is used to cut the section of desired the section of that DNA, and this DNA will be inserted into the or designed gene. So this is some transgenic, this is one of the variety. Let's say this is a desired gene. Let's say it's having a very particular character, like it's a sorter. Let's say this gene inserted here will give the sorter length or the, let's say, height of the any particular plant. Suppose we wanted a plant that is very much shorter, not longer, for the any particular purpose, and if that variety of that character of other organism is inserted into the through the help of a vector, particular maybe any bacteria, and that will be gun sorted into the, let's say if we wanted in the plant, in that plant's cell. So one gun is used in the labs, and that is injected into the this particular plant cell, and that will be further go for the tissue culture. So when it will further send for the tissue culture, it will grow as a plant or germination started, and that's how we'll get the desired plant. So this is something, a desired plant. but suppose we wanted a desired plant, for the example, a sorter plant, sort height plant, and it will be replicated for the next time as well through the pollination for the or harvesting. So this particular set of plant which in naturally used to be a high height in the low taller in the height, but due to insertion of this gene of the sorter variety of plant, this plant become started sorter in the length. Let's say this is the example. So this is how the genetically modification or genetically engineering practice is carried out, and I'm just explaining in the simple way, not in the very much technical terms, so just for the sake of understanding. Okay, proceeding ahead. The changing the way plant grow, and what will happen if any plant is genetically modified. So changing the way the plant grows, obviously the plant grows will be different than its natural version, making its tolerance level enhanced, its tolerance level, whether that may be the climate, that may be the temperature, or any kind of pressure, that will be enhanced, making its productivity increased, making it resistant to particular disease, whatever the disease can cause. And food produced using the edited crop is called GM food. So that is simple what we discussed earlier. Should we grow GM crops? This is important, and this may be the question, particularly for the mains perspective, the prospectus of GM crop. First is that offering benefits to the consumer as well as producer. Obviously, the input cost will be cut down for the farmers if that GM crop serves as a herbicide as well. So obviously that purpose for the seed and the purpose for the herbicide will be achieved in the single investment of the that just made for that GM crop. So obviously the consumers or farmers will be helped. And suppose that is there are some variety or some nutrients are additionally given, so obviously consumers as a general public will be there will be helpful and they will be benefited there, and producers will no need to extra go for some other type of mechanisms or tools to be incorporated with that particular seed, generally used in the natural type of seeds production. So it will be win-win situation for the both. Now, one of the example that how genetic engineering can improve crop production. So one of the example, the Arctic fish was inserted, the gene of this Arctic fish inserted into the tomato to make to the tolerant to the frost. Frost, one of the issue in the northern hemisphere, or let's say in the polar region. Generally, a tomato is one of the tropical plant, we know all, and that particular tomato could able to grow in even in the polar regions when its gene was the gene of Arctic fish was inserted into that, and that tomato gained the moniker named fish tomato. So that tomato variety, that GM tomato, able to grow even in the polar region. So that is something very unnatural. So but that was not permitted for the commercial use. So that is one of the example that how genetic engineering technique can improve the crop protection. Crops with better resistance to pest and disease can be created. So this is one of the example, one of the shining benefit of the GM crops. The use of herbicide, pesticide can be reduced or even eliminated. So ultimately it will maybe at the some point of time, if GM crops utility will be increased, then it will help reduce the use of or production of the herbicides. Farmers can achieve high yield and thereby get more income. So these are the nutritional content can be improved, shelf life of foods can be extended. Obviously shelf life, that means that food can be the life of foods will be enhanced through the genetically modification, or we can say that will not perish easily. Food with better taste and texture can be achieved. Crops can be engineered to withstand extreme weather. Like in India, we know that some of the crops, such as millets varieties, can withhold the extreme temperatures of 40-45 degree in the region of Rajasthan, Gujarat, or some part of Maharashtra. So that kind of, if we though extract out the genes of that particular extreme tolerant level or tolerance characters of that particular millets can be used in the maybe rice in the other plants, so that they can also withstand the that high temperature extreme weather conditions, so that we can even know how able to cope up with the climate change issues, where the extreme weathers are now becoming new normal. And gray side, why there is still a steep opposition that for the GM crops. First of all, the environmental effect. Obviously, GM crops can often present unintended side effects, disrupting biodiversity, food web chain, and ecological balance. So this is something very wide matter of interest, that how biodiversity can be issued, and this is maybe one of the issues, so that still in India only BT cotton is only permitted, because biodiversity can be checked. Suppose some weeds or some plants where some other organisms are dependent, like upon that primary producer. We all know that how food chain or food web works or functions. If suppose any genetically modified variety where the requirement of dependent organisms are not fulfilled, so probably there may be chances that that particular dependent consumers life, their food will be hampered, so that their growth, their productivity, and their entire lifespan may be hampered, or that may be checked. So this is the issues, how it can disrupt the biodiversity or food web or food chain, and ultimately it lead to the ecological disbalance. So this is the issue. And since genetically engineering is a new field in India, because we are not much well versed with this particular discipline, so that there is a requirement of the long field trials as well as the research and development, so that we are not in the stage that easily to adopt every GM crops available in front of us, but we need to go for the more R&D, so that we can ensure that that is not going to harm the biodiversity or environmental or ecological balance. Some health effects such as crops can if suppose that may be some harm known targets, like farm animals that ingest them, or some allergic or affect digestion in the human. So these are not even get trialed well, that whether humans digestion or allergic or some issues are there will be or not. So that is need to be even well justified and well trialed. GM crops are modified to include antibiotics to kill germs and pests, so that if antibiotics, if that is more no entered into the food chain, so probably antibiotic resistance can be there for the human. So if that is there, the ultimately that lead to the superbug threat, and maybe the curing of any illness or any problem or ailment will be again, that is a new kind of difficulties will be arises because of this antibiotic resistance crop. So this is that is how it can problematic for the human health as well. The social issues are there, like social issues, farmers are reluctant to adopt or own this, because there are limited rights. Their reuse seeds are the something that is limited to only to the some set of companies, those are indulged in the production of these seeds. So this is how hyper inputs cost led financial burden, as well as spike in the numbers of the lonely farmers. Obviously in India, most of the population of farmers are the marginalized or small, and their investment capabilities are very much limited, so that if seeds are highly priced of particular GM crops, so obviously that will be ultimately led to the loan more loan and loan taking tendencies, and that somehow if that repay of that loan is not done, so obviously that may obviously cause a further farmer distress, and probably entire income of that farmers will be go for the particular agriculture practice, and that may even diverge the other needs or basic needs of children's education, or even other basic amenities to be fulfilled. So these are the issue, and probably in the some areas like Maharashtra, in the Gujarat, farmer suicidal tendencies are there rising, and that is one of the social issues of the GM crops. And obviously if they are not able to, farmers are not able to cope up with these problems. So obviously government have to come into the picture, and government generally, in the sake of welfare of the people, generally tends to that declare a loan waiving. So ultimately that will affect the treasury of our country, obviously, and somehow check the other developmental activities because of this issue of the pro-familiarity. Then ultimately that previous kind of issues may also arise. So these are the issues, social issues. And economic issues are obviously more market driven. The economy will be there, multinational agribusiness companies will come into picture, and they will taking over the farming from the hands of small farmers. So these are the chances or possibility that may happen in the future. And dependence on the GM seed companies could prove to be a financial burden for the farmers. So these are the some possible issues or likelihood where if GM crops that varieties are adopted. So this is how GM crops may hamper the India or India's polity system or society. There are some questions how UPSC have framed the questions, that is from the part of biotechnology or agriculture. In the year 2021, we know the year they asked the question that Bolgard 1 and Bolgard 2 technologies are the mentioned in the context of. So 4 options were given: clonal propagation of crop plant, obviously not; developing GM crop plant, yes; production of plant growth substance; production of biofertilizer. So answer is 2 or B, developing GM crop plants, because these are the BT cotton varieties technique, Bolgard 1 and Bolgard 2, in the year 2002 when it was developed. So answer will be the B, for Bombay. These are the technique, obviously technologies for the BT cotton, the only GM crops permitted in India, and the year that is in the year 2000. So developing GM crops, this is the technique how BT cotton was developed in India. The next question related to same biotechnology section of agriculture. Okay. The with reference to GM mustard, I hope visible. Okay, 1 minute. This is visible. Okay. The question was, the with reference to GM mustard developed in India, consider following statement. First statement was, the GM mustard has the genes of soil bacterium that give the plant the property of pest resistance to wide variety of pests. No, this is a wrong, because this soil bacterium was used but not for the wide variety of pests, because we have already studied that this is resistance to the what? Herbicide. So not the pest. And second, GM mustard has the gene that allows the plant cross pollination and hybridization. Yes, this is correct. GM mustard has been developed jointly by the IRI and Punjab Agriculture University. No. The field trial was implemented, or that is undertaken in these two. This is for the field trial of the GM mustard, but the developed was in the Delhi University in the DU under the Professor Deepak Pental. So this is again wrong. So only two. So which statement above are correct? So obviously B, the only, that is B for Bombay. So these are the kind and type of questions asked in the UPSC. So we must be very careful while making notes or preparing for the current affairs for the civil services purpose UPSC. There's some other questions like mains question in the year 2019. How can biotechnology help to improve the living standards of farmers? So we have discussed how it can have economic, social impacts of the GM crop. So we can draw that idea of, to answer this question particularly from that section of the video, or that section of the discussion, that to answer in the 250 words. So okay. And the next question 2021, what are the research and development achievements in the applied biotechnology? How will these achievements will help to uplift the poorer section of society? So biotechnology, applied biotechnology is umbrella term within which genetically engineering or genetic engineering or GM crops are one of the part, as well as other parts will be also helpful, where in the medical application like agriculture and other research and development activities. So we need to understand that demand of the question, and one part will be formed that we can write the GM cropping and how that will help the poorers, particularly farmers sections, as well as ensure the food security for the that last mile people. So this is how we need to frame the answers and idea behind the framing, or how to meet the demand of the question. So please try to write the questions whatever asked in the previous year, and maybe that is for the PT or mains, and that practice need to be always remain continued, or that is to be persistent. Okay, so this all for the today's session. Here, before binding up the session, Vandana Shivaji, one of the she known as that uh, Gandhi of grain, famously Gandhi of grain. Grain means foods. She is famously known as Gandhi of grain, and anti-GMO, anti-genetically modified organism campaign. She leads that campaign, and see what is the way forward for this GM cropping or mustard, let's say in India. See, I quote, when it comes to owning the seeds for collecting royalties, the GMO company says it is mine. But when it comes to contamination, cross pollination, health problems, the response is we are not liable. So this is what she highlighted, that paradox or a kind of hypocrisy that is put forwarded by the GMO companies, or these multinational companies. So this is one of the issue arises in countries like developing countries like in India. So that a country needs to be, our government have to be very careful, and obviously hopefully they are looking into the all parameters and all corners, so that ensure that win-win situation for our farmers and producer and consumers, all the stakeholders involved in here, and ultimately to the public, we the Indians. So with this, I'll conclude this today's session. Thank you for being with me. Thank you.